truthfully say to you all that we children at home are full of cheerfulness and courage. We are trying to do all we can to help our gallant sailors, soldiers and airmen. And when peace comes, remember, it will be for us, the children of today, to make the world of tomorrow a better and happier place. My sister is by my side, and we are both going to say good night to you. Come on, Margaret. Good night, children. Good night, and good luck to you all.
Yes, the moment of release was, without any doubt, the greatest in my life, and in the lives of all my fellow prisoners of war of Offlag 12B. We'd been moved from the camp in which we'd spent 18 weary months, and had gone through a somewhat anxious period, expecting a further move from day to day. But the move never came, and every day brought the American troops nearer to us in their spectacular advance through Germany. We were standing at the edge of a slag heap in the little railway town of Lollar, a few miles north of Gießen, when the great moment came. It was epitomized by a great cry of the American tanks, a concerted shout which went up in English, French, Russian, Polish, Dutch, Italian, German, in fact in almost every conceivable language, from the packed group of people from every corner of Europe and the British Empire to whom the arrival of the Americans meant deliverance. To us of Offlag 12B, the senior British officers' camp in Germany, which included 11 brigadiers, it meant the end of a long, weary term of imprisonment dating back to Dunkirk days for some. To the French, Belgians, Dutch, Russians, Poles, and others, it meant emancipation from slavery. Rumors had been flying around for days about where the American troops were. German trucks returning from the front were continually claiming to have missed capture by minutes. But early on Wednesday afternoon, it became plain that the Americans were very close. Our temporary camp was a group of huts out in an open field with a slag heap and an arms factory which had long since ceased active production behind us. About 3 o'clock in the afternoon, things began to warm up. Shells began to fall ahead of us in the field, and machine gun fire began to get more and more intense. Soon we could see figures appearing on the horizon. It was decided to evacuate the camp to the German air raid shelters, which were dug deep under the slag heap. Our German guards no sooner entered the shelters than they unbuckled their arms and threw them in heaps in corners of the shelter. They'd been a little bit embarrassed about their arms for some time. They thought they wouldn't get a very good reception from the Americans if they were armed. I dumped my belongings in the shelter and went outside. The noise of the battle increased. And then suddenly, out of a wood, came the American tanks and tracked troop carriers. Everyone became delirious with excitement. "Come on and see the American tanks," I shouted to some Russian girls who'd been working in the station restaurant. "American tanks? Невозможно," they cried. "Pas possible," cried the French. But it was possible. It was true. One of the troop carriers stopped. 2 men jumped out and came down to the far bank of the Lahn River, which separated us from them. I ran down the steep bank on my side. By the greatest piece of luck, there was an old barge tied up there. "How's things over there with you?" the Americans asked. "Fine," I said. "You want to come across?" "Yeah, can you get that boat over?" "You bet your life I can." And with 3 others, including the only American POW in the camp, I poled the rickety old craft across. "How are your guards?" the Americans asked when we were about in midstream. "Like lambs," I said. "You needn't worry about them." "Oh, we're not worrying," said one of the Americans, fingering his gun. We nearly upset the boat on the return trip, but we got our deliverers safely and dryly across. They forced their way through a cheering crowd of POWs and foreign workers. Relief lit up the faces of even the Germans. No more bombs, no more alarms for them. The worst of the war was finished as far as they were concerned.
Sweet tem mãe, não tem nada. Quem tem uma mãe tem tudo. Quem não tem mãe não tem nada. Minha mãe, quem é aquela que ali está aos pés da cruz? Minha mãe, quem é aquela que ali está aos pés da cruz? É Maria Madalena, pedindo perdão a Jesus. É Maria Madalena, pedindo perdão a Jesus. Oh, minha mãe, minha mãe, oh, meu amor mais profundo, oh, minha mãe, minha mãe, oh, meu amor mais profundo, não há ouro que te valha, vales mais que todo mundo. Não há ouro que te valha, vales mais que tudo.
But here Dunkirk is another English epic. And to my mind, what was most characteristically English about it, so typical of us, so absurd and yet so grand and gallant that you hardly know whether to laugh or to cry when you read about them, was the part played in the difficult and dangerous embarkation, not by the warships, magnificent though they were, but by the little pleasure steamers. We've known them and laughed at them, these fussy little steamers, all our lives. We've called them the shilling six. We've watched them load and unload their crowds of holiday passengers, the gents full of high spirits and bottled beer, the ladies eating pork pies, the children sticky with peppermint rock. Sometimes they only went as far as the next seaside resort, but the boldest of them might manage a channel crossing to let everybody have a glimpse of Boulogne. They were usually paddle steamers, making a great deal more fuss with all their churning than they made speed, and they weren't proud, for they let you see their works going round. They liked to call themselves queens and belles, and even if they were new, there was always something old-fashioned, a Dickens touch, a mid-Victorian air about them. They seemed to belong to the same ridiculous holiday world as Pierrots and piers, sandcastles, ham and egg teas, palmists, automatic machines, and crowded, sweating promenades. But they were called out of that world, and let it be noted, they were called out in good time and good order. Yes, these Brighton belles and Brighton queens left that innocent, foolish world of theirs to sail into the inferno, to defy bombs, shells, magnetic mines, torpedoes, machine gun fire, to rescue our soldiers. Some of them, alas, will never return. Among those paddle steamers that will never return was one that I knew well, for it was the pride of our ferry service to the Isle of Wight, none other than the good ship Gracie Fields. I tell you, we were proud of the Gracie Fields, for she was the glittering queen of our local line, and instead of taking an hour over her voyage, used to do it churning like mad in 45 minutes. And now, never again will we board her at Cowes and go down into her dining saloon for a fine breakfast of bacon and eggs. She has paddled and churned away forever. But now, look, this little steamer, like all her brave and battered sisters, is immortal. She'll go sailing proudly down the years in the epic of Dunkirk. And our great-grandchildren, when they learn how we began this war by snatching glory out of defeat and then swept on to victory, may also learn how the little holiday steamers made an excursion to hell, and came back glorious.